I'm Tracy Brown, Director of Sense About Science, and welcome to the opening of the very first Evidence Week in Holyrood. Constituents, MSPs and leading research bodies come together to look at how well equipped Holyrood is to use and scrutinise evidence on some of the toughest policy issues. Whether you're here in Zoom to ask and respond to questions or following on YouTube or one of the other platforms, welcome to you all. You'll notice this is being recorded, as well as inspiring further discussion that will enable those MSPs and constituents who don't manage to connect this evening to continue a conversation. Evidence Week is organised by Sense About Science in partnership with the Scottish Parliamentary Information Centre, and that's the body that provides MSPs with research and understanding of research issues. And this opening event also with Research Data Scotland and Administrative Data Research Scotland, and we're going to hear a bit about what they do shortly. I'm also delighted to have UK Statistics Authority involved in this evening's proceedings as well. Now, we began this conversation pre-pandemic about the need for an Evidence Week in Holyrood. So it was back in 2018 and 2019 that we began to talk about this, and constituents began to contact us saying, we got questions and we'd love to see this format. It is about the public interest in how evidence is used and scrutinised to make policy decisions. And it's been almost 3 years in the making with the pandemic intervening. And I think it's fair to say that if some of us knew then all of us know now how important it is that evidence is used to scrutinise and make policy decisions. MSPs have to leap from homelessness to offshore fisheries and back to rural poverty before looking at the prospects for COVID-19 recovery. So I think it's reasonable to ask, if that's what they're doing in any one day, what should be done, what could be done across the research community to equip them, and how we as a public are following whether they're really equipped as best they can be. We'll be joined tonight by constituents from all over Scotland who are opening the event with the questions that they have. It's some of the questions that have been selected from a fantastic online resource. We've got more coming throughout this week. It's a week of rapid fire briefings for MSPs involving cutting edge research in research institutions across Scotland and elsewhere. And there'll be lots more of that, lots more opportunity for constituents to put their questions. Well, we've selected some fabulous questions this evening, and I'm delighted to say that we have a really good showing of members of the Scottish Parliament to answer them. They'll be responding along with some of the people who are responsible for the evidence base that Holyrood draws upon. But first, I know, before I introduce those people and tell you who they are, I know that Allison, Johnston, Presiding Officer, would like to say a few words of welcome. And so, Allison, can I introduce you?
You can indeed. Thank you very much, Tracy. I think you've given a very good picture of why this evening is important. So I'm Allison Johnston, MSP, Presiding Officer of the Scottish Parliament. I'm really pleased to be involved in this evening's opening event of the Sense About Science Evidence Week. And I'm really chuffed to see so many people joining us online, including so many of my MSP colleagues and their constituents. As an MSP, as a former committee member, a debater in the chamber, and now as Presiding Officer of the Scottish Parliament, I am acutely aware of the unique role for parliaments and parliamentarians in holding government to account. I think you made the point very well that we cover a diverse range of subjects in the course of a day, never mind a week. So that evidence, that policy base is all important. And we know that governments can commit to targets, actions and spending, but it's parliaments that are mandated by citizens to hold governments to account, to ensure that the law is as robust as it can be, and to assess if budgets, for example, are following government policy or the policy that parliaments have voted on. So these are fundamental roles for legislators all over the world, and the evidence base for that scrutiny is absolutely crucial. So there are challenges, of course, for parliaments in how they can effectively scrutinise what are often complex and cross-cutting issues. I saw this myself. I suppose a very good recent example is attending the climate change talks at COP26, where we discussed the role of parliaments in tackling the climate and ecological crises. In multifaceted issues like this, access to the right analysis and expertise comes absolutely to the fore. So we need to ensure as parliamentarians that we're hearing from the right people at the right time. And also we need to know that we're able to interpret and assess the knowledge and evidence that those experts bring to the Parliament. So I really warmly welcome the opportunity we have today to discuss how policy evidence is used and scrutinised. Is this something that is being done to the best of our ability? Where should we get our expert advice from? And how do we better learn from other parliaments? Today is an opportunity to explore some of these issues and much more, and I'm really grateful to everyone who has contributed to a diverse range of questions ahead of today's discussion, covering topics from eating disorders, prisons policy, sustainability, and artificial intelligence. This event is a great opportunity for you all to hear directly from your MSPs and also from some conveners of the Parliament's committees. Parliaments across the world are often supported by independent research units. Ours is SPICE, as you've heard, the Scottish Parliament Information Centre. And I'd really like to take this moment to pay tribute to the many researchers who are participating and engaging in this event. We look forward to hearing from you throughout the week. And I'd like to encourage my MSP colleagues to seize the opportunities that are presented this week for us all for personal speed briefings on hot topics with top researchers. There's a lot to discuss this evening. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you make the most of all the events this week. Thank you.
Alison, thank you. That's a fabulous introduction. And I think the spirit that you showed there in terms of openness and interest in how to do things is actually echoed in the amount of MSPs that are signing up to the events over the week, but also with a formidable list of those kind of questions that are actually showing up tonight to answer them, because those are things that are vexing researchers as well as policymakers. So really, really impressed with the openness and embrace that Holyrood has shown for this event, and you've put that very well. Thank you. We have a fabulous group of conveners so that's the people who are looking after the parliamentary committees who delve into the detail of some of these issues. We have a fabulous group this evening on hand, and so I'm just going to let you know who they are before I introduce the experts also, and we go to our first question. So we have with us Martin Whitfield, who is, as well as his shadow role as Minister for Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning, he generally looks at those sorts of questions as well as youth employment. We have Eleanor Whittam, I believe, has joined us, which is wonderful. Social justice and social security, a subject for her. Brian Whittle, I saw pop up here, and also environment, land and reform, big questions of biodiversity, but importantly, member of the COVID-19 Recovery Committee. So I know some questions are going to come your way, Brian, later. Jenny Minto, I saw pop up, and rural affairs, the islands and natural environment. We did have a lot of questions about rural issues and rural poverty that I think we're going to be looking to feed into some of the discussions over the next few weeks as well, Jenny. I'm looking forward to some input from you. Michael Mara, I know, is trying to join us. And education, skills and young people also very much on his beat, trying to join us, but with some problems with electricity. And Richard Leonard, I believe, Public Audit Committee convener. We'll also be joined by constituency MSPs in response to questions. Before I just move to our first question, I just want to hear a few words from our experts who are going to help you. And if there are questions that require some sort of technical answers, they're there too. We hope to give you some assistance on that, but also to show people, I think, just the wide range of expert input that's available to Holyrood. We have Graham Cook from SPICE, you've already mentioned. I think the questions will go his way. Audrey Mcdougall, Chief Social Researcher and head also of the COVID-19 Analysis Division in the Scottish Government. So it's very relevant to many of the questions. Roger Halliday, Chief Statistician to the Scottish Government, and also Ed Humferson, who is the Director General for Regulation at the Office for Statistics Regulation. And Ed, I'd like you just to say a few words, please, about the role that you play. I think that's quite useful for people to hear, and then we'll move to our first question.
Well, thanks very much, Tracy, and I'm so happy to be here. It's really fantastic event, and really looking forward to hearing from everyone. But as you say, I'm the head of the Office for Statistics Regulation, which I think probably sounds very technical and very official, but it's very far from that. In fact, it's extremely focused on the public, and that's because every time one hears a political debate, a lot of numbers get used. Numbers on employment or poverty or health or crime. And these numbers are all based on data and statistics. And because these numbers are part of the sort of public debate, it's really important that members of the public can be confident in those statistics and data. And that's where we come in. We don't just think statistics are for decision makers, for ministers, for officials. That's quite an elitist view. In fact, our view is they're for everyone. They're for everyone to understand the issues that they're thinking about and the world they live in. So what we do is we expect any statistical data that is used publicly to be trustworthy, to be high quality, and to be high value. Trustworthiness, quality, and value. We call it TQV, and we think that's the underpinning of public confidence. By and large, Tracy, the work that's done by analysts and statisticians in the Scottish Government really does comply with that. But there will be times where things come out that cause MSPs or members of the public in Scotland concerns. And we quite often get people raising issues with us, whether they be MSPs or members of the public in Scotland. And we're really happy to step in, help clarify things, give our view, and if necessary, request and require the Scottish Government to improve things. So that's a really brief nutshell of what we're here to do. We're really here to ensure that statistics serve the public. Thank you.
That's good. I think that's really helpful for everyone to know that there are people batting for the public interest from all different angles, and I think that's crucial. And we're going to be hearing a bit more from everyone else who's available on the panel tonight. As you come in on things, do please tell people who you are, particularly for our kind of YouTube broadcast out there. I think it's important for everyone to understand the different facets of government. I should also mention I've got Lindsay Murphy here who's on the desk. There are some people who feel a little bit uncomfortable asking questions, and so Lindsay's going to be a voice for them, but they are present in the room or around about, and will be hoping to speak to their MSP over the week. Let's move without further ado to our first question. Ali Zlatar, who's concerned with eating disorders. Ali.
Hi there, thank you all so much. Just checking if you're able to hear me. Yeah, great. Okay, so right into my question. Especially after the pandemic, eating disorders are more apparent than ever before. With over 3.4 million people in the UK alone are affected by eating disorders annually. There are a limited number of resources and funding for treatment facilities. Now, eating disorders are the most life-threatening illness, with over 1 in 5 dying from the disease. Now, based on this data, how are you going to address eating disorders going forward, and what tools will you be using to monitor this? Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Ali. And I think Kokab Stewart, you're in Glasgow. Calvin Kokab Stewart is your constituency MSP. Kokab, you're here with us this evening. Is that right? No? Okay. Should we go to Sue Webber? Public health, I think, is very much your...
Sorry, Tracy, did you call on me there?
Yes, sorry, did I mispronounce your name?
Yeah, I am here. I caught the end of it. My sound was a wee bit wacky there.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that question. I think I've got another question as well slightly later on. I think that sort of like coming from a newly elected, I still consider myself in that bracket. When we get questions that come from, you know, as we've already said, a wide variety of different areas, It won't surprise you to know that we are not experts in all of these. What I am learning is that sometimes people ask quite general questions, and some of them are very specific, like yours, and I believe there's somebody else on the call that has one as well. So I think from my point of view, what might be helpful is to let you know what I would do about that, and then what I can do is actually give you a written response to your actual question, rather than trying to attempt to answer it tonight, as it were. Although if there's anybody else on the call, please do feel free to jump in with it. So when I get something as specific as that, the first thing that I do is to sort of like get further information from you to get the full context of where you're coming from, because the more information I have, the better I can look to accurate sources of information and relevant ones. So usually what I do then is to look at spice in the first instance. I would go, and if it's very specific, I would ask for information around that issue at that point. Then what I also do is sort of connect with the relevant committee as well to see if they have done any research or taken any evidence in that, and also to look at the programme for government and what has recently been issued in that area. We also look and do a check on questions that have been put in Parliament, whether they be written or whether they be verbal, and we have a look at that. Also, probably a member of my staff would obviously research it as well to see what the background information is, if there's any current sort of topical stuff that's about it, because there's often awareness raising campaigns that tie in. So we would, I was going to say triangulate, but there's more than 3 pillars there. So we would sort of try and bring all of that together. And if after that we still weren't able to provide you with an answer, then what I would do is I would write to the relevant cabinet secretary or the minister that has responsibility for that portfolio. So I hope that gives you a wee bit of insight into what goes on behind the scenes when we get questions from the public. But with regards to specific answers, I'm quite happy to take that way and give you a written response that is worthy of your interest.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I know we've got another of your constituents also with a health-related question, actually. But before we go to Danny, I think is on the line. But before we go to Danny, I'm just going to ask Sue Webber, because public health is your issue. Sue Webber.
Hi, public health and COVID, so not on the most great form today. So apologies for that. Thanks for the question, Ali. Yes, I know that right now it's really unacceptable for those that are suffering from eating disorders, as you said, to be waiting for as long as they are to have any sort of treatment. You know, there's a national 18-week target for child and mental health services to access that, which is so critical, and those aren't being met at the moment, and it's really important that they are, especially when, as you said, these are life-threatening issues that you are facing. I know that there's some work in England, I think, isn't there, going on that you have, I'm looking at some stuff to my right here that I've got. Elsewhere in the UK, there's a target for treatment to begin within 1 week for urgent cases, and 4 weeks for routine, but that's never the right thing. We know that we need to put pressure on the government to step up what they are providing in terms of services for people that are facing eating disorders. And as an opposition member of the Health and Social Care Committee, that's where I can really put the questions to the Minister and the Cabinet Secretary when they come, to make sure that you are put front and centre and you're not forgotten about.
Well, thank you, Sue. I think we can see already there is a whole range of information that just really
Thank you. Am I allowed to add on something at the end of that?
Ali, I can't come back to you because we're going to knock out other people with very long answers. So by all means, put it in the chat if you want to do that, and we'll come back to you.
Okay. If there's going to be a sentence, but absolutely, I can put it in the chat.
Danny's been waiting a long time. Danny. Are you okay, Daniel? Are you struggling to unmute?
No, sorry, I thought you said Ali. Sorry, rhyming of the names. Thank you so much for having me tonight. So large-scale genetic sequencing and health data linkage are expanding our knowledge of disease. However, many people have concerns about the way that their health data will be used. Enabling researchers, healthcare professionals, and companies to collaborate and improve patient outcomes is paramount. Therefore, my question is, what is the government doing to address these concerns?
Thank you. I'm going to ask everyone to be as brief as possible with these questions so we can fit as many in this evening as we can. So just really short answers, please. Coco, did you want to add something more on this particular issue? I think what you said previously maybe stands. Yeah, okay. So can we go to Audrey Mcdougall? Audrey, tell us who you are before a response to this question. I think it would be useful for people to know. Do you have something to say about this?
So very briefly, I'll just say, so I'm Audrey Mcdougall. As I said, I'm the Scottish Government's Chief Social Researcher. And I can just say in general terms, the use of data linkage is absolutely essential to enable us to deal with many different social problems. And it is an issue that we are taking extremely seriously and exploring a range of different approaches to enable us to link data. However, this needs to be done in a spirit of openness. We need to explain to the public what might be done with data, how data might be used, and to ensure people feel comfortable with the use of their data in any particular processes that we wish to carry out. At the moment, we have a way of working whereby researchers who wish to use data and to make those data linkages need to contact the government, contact the relevant team within the Scottish Government, outline their proposals, outline the data that they wish to use, and then we have a discussion to look at whether it's appropriate for that data to be provided and linked, always in an anonymised fashion. So there are a number of different approaches and processes that are in place within the government at the moment. However, it's an area that is developing rapidly. And I think at this point, it would be best to pass over to Roger to say a little bit about Research Data Scotland, which is really where the future of this kind of work is going to be sitting. So Tracy, if you don't mind, I'll do that.
Absolutely. Roger, would you like to say a few words? We've got a lot of MSPs who want to speak on this subject too, and I'm going to try and fit some of them in.
Sure, I'll be brief, Tracy. So I'm Roger Halliday. I'm the Chief Statistician for the Scottish Government. I'm also the Chief Executive of this new organisation, Research Data Scotland. And Research Data Scotland has been brought together to create a safe way to connect data around a person, a place, or business, and to unlock a lot of the value that we've got in our fantastic public sector data, but to do that in very safe ways. And what we do, a couple of things that we do for that, so we have an internationally recognised system called the 5 Safes framework to keep data safe, that's safe data. So you don't identify individuals, or you cannot identify individuals with that data, and that no decisions made about individuals. Safe settings, so that we have a very secure facility to keep that data, which is at the University of Edinburgh, something called a National Safe Haven. Safe people, so that's data that's only used by trusted, qualified researchers. Safe projects, so that each project and use of the data has to be done, has to have independent scrutiny, and has to be based upon the public good. And safe outputs, so that anything that comes out of the secure computing facility that data's kept, any research outputs are checked by humans to make sure that there's no chance of identification. So there's really safe and secure ways of handling that data now. And I think that is the basis, along with what Audrey was saying there about being transparent about who's accessing what data for what purpose and over what time, that will give us the foundations to unlock a lot of that value. And the final thing that I would say, because you mentioned it, was about the engagement with the private sector. Well, generally, when we've done polling, when we've done focus groups with the public or different interest groups, that the people expect to be able to, that this data that they have, that the public sector have about them, to be connected to drive improvements in services or or find new treatments and things like that, but are more nervous when the private sector is involved. And what we're doing in government currently is we've commissioned an independent group to oversee some essentially policy or rules of engagement with the private sector, who would be working in collaboration with industry. So that's not in place yet. So
okay, thank you. Now I'm going to take Michael Morrow had his hand up on this. I'm going to take your comments. So Michael Morrow is the MSP for North East Scotland. I see Brian Whittle's hand. Brian, there's another question coming up very shortly that I want to take you on as well. So can we all go to that straight after this? But Michael, a quick word from you, please.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, we've got a long history in Scotland from the Community Health Index, which was piloted in the 1970s, of having that kind of linked data that allows anonymised data sets to be available for research purposes, which has led us to being one of the nations at the forefront of medical research internationally. But we have a long history of trust that's based in that as well. And that's one of the reasons our medical research institutes across Scotland continue to perform so well internationally. It's absolutely vital that we maintain that trust. You know, that's a public good, trust in itself. So the Parliament and politicians, I think, have to be really aware of the challenges that face, that you're highlighting, Danny, as technology expands, rapid mapping of the genome, Oxford Nanopore, mapping genomes in a matter of hours. The scale of that data, the protection of it, is absolutely integral to making sure that we have that incredibly important national asset, which is trust. And I think that for us, I think as politicians, making sure that we maintain that process, as well as being cognizant of the infrastructure that's required to do it, is going to be critical as those technologies develop.
Thank you. Great mention of public good there. I saw lots of statisticians nodding. We're going to go now to Ryan Dougherty from Lanark.
Hi there. Hi. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw the government take extraordinary measures to fight this virus with a low mortality rate by using policies such as compulsory face masks, lockdowns to vaccine passports. We have seen vastly supportive compliance from the public, but so far we have seen little accountability from the government and its MSPs for these policies. My question is, will we see a demonstrable assessment, such as an estimate of how many lives the pandemic measures saved? Will we also see an assessment of the wider impact that these measures had on our society, such as the impact on alcohol and drug deaths, suicides, and increased rates of mental health issues?
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. That was a really thoughtful question, and it's got a lot in it. So, Brian, I'm going to hand this to you as the MSP for his region, but also I think an area of interest for you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dougherty, for your question, and it is a key question. It's a crucial question. I think, in answer to the question, it's absolutely imperative that we are able to look back over the steps that were taken, and mistakes have been made, and I don't think that necessarily is a criticism. I think that every single government always started from ground zero, if you like, and sort of a lot of the policies were made up on the hoof, really. And if I go back to, I think a lot of that has got to do with the way we collect data and the data that we collect, or more and more importantly, the data that we don't collect. I think we're behind the curve in that. But it's essential that we are able to look back unfettered across all the decisions that were made. And there was some, you highlighted some there. I think the one that always gets to me is the drug and alcohol deaths and services, from the most disaffected in society, and those furthest removed from society had to be impacted the worst. And I'm not quite sure we'll ever get to the bottom of that. But we also had, the release of elderly patients into care homes and the impact that had. And I think it's really, really important that we as politicians continually press the government to ensure that when we look back across this, it's looked. We look at it with complete 2020 vision on this, without any interference, because we have to accept that mistakes were made. We have to accept that there were better ways of doing things, and we have to look at the impact of things like face masks. We have to look at the incredible compliance of the Scottish public. It's quite remarkable how the Scottish public, or the UK public in reality, responded to requests. And I think we have to remember that most of the things that we were asked to do were not law. They were actually guidance, and everybody followed that guidance. So I think it's only right that we get the opportunity, and it's crucial that we get the opportunity to look back across all those decisions and have them published unfettered.
Ryan, thank you. I wanted, before going to one of I think there are members here from the Public Accounts Committee as well, but I think Eleanor Whittam is an MSP who's joined us on the line here. And I think, Eleanor, people that you think about as in convening the social justice aspect of things, and maybe you sort of see things a little bit also in some of these trade-offs that Ryan was asking about. How do you trade off the impact on one group for another? Is that something you want to comment on?
Yeah, thanks for that, Tracy, and thanks, Ryan, for your question. I think we need to be really mindful of the harms that have come to pass for people who were maybe not impacted by COVID, but the measures that we took have actually left them with lasting consequences from different areas. And if I think about the intersectionality of these issues, that's really important as well. So if we think about women as a group, they were disproportionately affected by some of the COVID measures that were in place. Precarious employment, taken the vast majority of the homeschooling and all those additional pressures. And if we think about the additional harms, as Brian Whittle mentioned, with regards to addictions, and that's something that impacts on the committee that I'm on. I think when you have the removal of support systems that have been in place for a long time, the subsequent impact of that's going to be felt for a long time to come. So I think all of these things have to actually be addressed in the COVID inquiry, not just actually what happened at the time, but what lasting impact is going to have coming forward.
Thank you, and I see we have got quite a few members. Richard Leonard, Public Audit Committee, I think would be a good person to hear from here. Richard, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still with you. I mean, I think the Public Audit Committee has been looking quite a lot at the pandemic pound and how support for business worked, whereas I think Ryan's question is more about the human face of this and what the impact has been of the action that was taken. I mean, I think that at the start of the COVID pandemic, I was leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and we were taking outside advice from experts to try to test some of the advice that the government was getting, because we were in uncharted waters, and I think we wanted to make sure that at all times the best advice was being followed, and in our view, at all times it wasn't. But these are all things, Tracy, that I think will come out in the public inquiry, and it's and I hope that people like Ryan and others see that as an opportunity to prosecute some of these arguments, because I think they do go to the heart of the decisions that were taken in a very difficult time for the whole country.
Thank you. I did want to just move on to, I see Jenny Minto's joined us and will give us a bit of a perspective on rural aspects of these questions. But Jenny, I've got a couple of questions that are coming in for you, so I'm going to come to you very shortly. Lindsay, we've got another complicated question coming the desk, I know now, so can you read this for us and let us know which constituency it is? So I'm trying to do, I feel like I'm doing speed dating here, trying to find constituents and MSPs, but we're getting there. Thank you.
So this is from Patricia Tailwood from Edinburgh Eastern. And the question is, there is an increasing evidence that the cheaper options to prison, as well as improving education, relationships, resilience and social integration, are highly effective in helping to stabilise women's lives and promote readiness to change. What is the evidence and/or rationale that justify the continuation of a prison practice that has proven detrimental to our population economically, on mental well-being, perpetuating social segregation for future generations?
Right, so this is quite a packed question. I mean, there are different elements of this. I think Martin Whitfield, did you want Ash Reagan? I haven't seen on this call. So Ash Reagan's the constituency MSP. So I wonder if Martin Whitfield might take an aspect of this question.
Yes, I'm more than happy to contribute to this, because I think the question goes to the heart of really what we've been couching around in these discussions, which is how does the data affect, create government policy, and how does Parliament hold government to account using and questioning either that data or indeed, as Richard mentioned earlier on, bringing in other data and scientific approaches to it. And I think prison's a classic example because it highlights a fundamental policy decision. All of the data that I have seen indicates there are better methods than incarceration. However, part of prison that society wants is as an element of punishment. And so it's how do those two policies sit together? As a Scottish Labour, and I would consider myself human person, there are better ways of incarceration. It is expensive, it is detrimental, and no matter who goes into the system, most of the time they come out of the system in a worse position than they are. So, you know, to the question, are there proven cheaper methods? Yes, there are. Are they effective? I certainly think they are effective. They need proper funding. But the difficulty is that we come into conflict with a public discussion that needs to happen about what is the purpose of prison.
Right, thank you.
Sweet.
Thank you. We've got a lot of hands going up now. Audrey Mcdougall.
Thanks very much, and thanks for that question. I just thought it might be helpful to respond as the convener of the Criminal Justice Committee of the Scottish Parliament, because this is an issue that we've been looking at really since the beginning of this parliamentary session, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think it's safe to say that one of the issues and one of the things that emerged from the evidence that we took specifically on issues in relation to women in prison was really, I suppose, the fact that despite evidence that has been presented in the past, along with a number of initiatives over the years to reduce the number of women in prisons, that's actually probably had very little impact. And on this issue of imprisonment broadly, but specifically in the context of women, we took some very interesting evidence from the Inspector of Prisons, Wendy Sinclair, and she spoke about her experience of meeting and engaging with women in prison. And I quote, just part of what her evidence was that when she walked around a prison, it was what stood out for her was the number of women who were mentally unwell and in poor mental health. And it was clear to her that if we had a presumption of liberty for women rather than imprisonment, particularly where they're doing a good job caring for their children in their family setting, then the number of women coming into custody would be much lower. And we've set out quite a lot of the evidence and our recommendations around that in a report that you can find on the Scottish Parliament website that really sets out what we feel are priority issues, particularly around imprisonment for women. And broadly speaking, they include alternative options, recognising that, for example, short custody is not rehabilitating, it's not effective, and actually it can make a woman's situation much worse. So I'll leave it there. I'm sure there are others wanting to come in.
That report from your committee is available already.
Say again, Tracy?
That report from your committee is available already?
It is, yes, it's on the website.
Okay, we can share that with the constituent who's raised the question. Thank you, Audrey. I did also want to go to Audrey Mcdougall very briefly. We're going to start running short on time with people here. Did you have something to add on?
So, I mean, all I can say is, from a political or a policy perspective, I can't particularly comment, but, there is a presumption against the use of short sentences. And there is an expansion being made at the moment to community justice services to try and ensure that where possible, there are alternatives to prison. However, we do have to recognise that courts will decide how to deal with people who are convicted of offences. So we run into that slight, I don't know what you call it, that slight tricky issue where, we can't dictate what the courts do or say.
For anyone who's just joining us online now, we just asked the question to the government social researcher. That was why we went to Audrey then. I'm going to jump to the next question, which I think Lindsay's also asking on behalf of Robert Frederick. And this is really a challenging question. My goodness, you're going everywhere.
So the question is, given the advancements in artificial intelligence and robotics, what evidence is there that this will help eradicate poverty by increasing employment opportunities when equipment exists that could significantly reduce the present unskilled labour, traditional job markets such as house building with mouldings and 3D printing, not to mention supermarkets without staff?
Okay, so is AI going to start replacing jobs? And what kind of evidence are we needing for this? I mean, Richard Lockheed, so Lindsay, would you tell me what the constituency was for that, please?
Yes, sorry, that was Airdrie and Shotts.
Okay, which I think that is Neil Gray, so we don't have Neil Gray available at the moment. But Richard Lockheed, I think employment is an area that you cover and are concerned by.
Yeah, hi there, hello. I'm here to hear from my constituent later on another question, but happy to talk about AI. Just to say that obviously it's a very real concern, it's a big issue, and the Scottish Government did publish our AI strategy just last year, and of course that outlined how an appropriate use of AI could transform Scotland and improve the quality of life for many people in this country through health developments or other areas as well. And of course it's something that Scotland's very good at. We've got lots of expertise. We've got the University of Edinburgh, which is home to the AI Research Centre and its School of Informatics, which of course has got an international reputation. So there's lots of jobs being created already in terms of research and development. And we've also got the Industrial Centre in Scotland for AI Research and Digital Diagnostics, which involves 15 partners across Scotland, the NHS, industry, St Andrews University and other various universities as well. So there's actually a critical mass of jobs in this area at the moment, but of course this is questions about spreading it out to work for the benefit of the people of Scotland. So that's why the government has signed up to the OECD's 5 principles and 5 value-based principles. I'll just go through them very briefly and then stop there. Firstly, that it must, under the framework, be beneficial to people and the planet, respect the rule of law and human rights, promote transparency, be safe and secure, and allow organisations to be held to account. So these 5 value-based principles have been adopted by the Scottish Government in taking forward AI. And of course, as we can see around the world, AI has been used to help tackle poverty and protect jobs and people's livelihoods through use of food production and agriculture and other areas as well.
Thank you, Richard. Michael Mara is also here. Michael's still with us.
Yep.
On skills, I think would be useful to hear from you very briefly on this question.
Yeah, I suppose Lindsay's kind of asking about the upsides and the downsides to AI and whether we're actually kind of analysing those appropriately. I mean, I think that it's pretty clear that automation is going to pose a pretty significant threat, as well as the opportunities that Richard is outlining to many jobs, and not just jobs that have been removed from the economy, traditionally more manual-based ones, but mass triaging of data, many kind of higher order skills that we might have seen to be kind of more white-collar jobs that have been protected in previous economic transitions are going to be exposed as a result of artificial intelligence and machine learning approaches. So the structure of economy actually is going to be fairly significantly threatened and changed in the coming years. But that's not something we can put in a box. We can't undo artificial intelligence. So we actually have to govern it and understand what it can do. And I think that's why many people are having debates about things around kind of, 4-day weeks and talking about a shift to the kind of actually basis of the rights that workers have in that kind of, in our economy. And it's pretty clear to me that government needs to take a very active role in understanding and governing this change to make sure we have the kind of economy we want rather than the kind of economy that tech companies want to give us. And that is, I think, the real challenge of government, rather than just allowing the kind of this process to let rip. But I mean, happy to exchange emails or to understand more of your views on this, Lindsay, because I think it's a matter of huge concern for the Labour Party in the coming years.
Roger Halliday, this is a moment for you. How do we make sure that government's asking the right questions, tracking this stuff? I mean, are you going to see the early warning system? You've got the early warning system to see the early indicators if people are starting to lose their jobs, and if we are going to have an impact on skills.
Well, I mean, I would start off by saying that I think the comments that people have made so far are absolutely spot on. It's not, this is already here. We're AI, and it's about putting governance and making sure that it's done right. In terms of seeing the impacts of it, I mean, we've certainly seen the impacts of it already in the public sector in terms of improvements of things, of processes that are being made more efficient, or being able to predict and prevent things from happening. In terms of the labour market effects, yes, we'll be tracking that through our labour market statistics, and but I wouldn't say that there's been a specific effect that I could put down to AI, rather than sort of for the wider economic change from sort of perhaps more routine jobs to higher skilled jobs that we've seen over quite a long period of time.
Thank you. I'm going to go to a question now from, I think we've got Elspeth, is that right, coming up? Elspeth is ready. Can you tell us which constituency you're from?
Just checking you can hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Okay. I'm from Northeast region. My question is relating to Scotland-wide. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I'm a social scientist. I'm also a trustee of Scottish Badgers. And my question is, the tobacco giants fought back against the scientific evidence showing that smoking causes cancer. Today, we see the agrochemical giants fighting back against the evidence showing that insecticides, herbicides, and fertilizers cause ecological collapse. Question: are we equipping our policymakers with the ability to know the difference between independent, objective evidence and industry-funded research, a showcase for lobbyist interest?
Okay. I see we have quite a number of environmentally mindful MSPs with us. Where are we? Graham Cook from Spice. Can I ask you this question? Because Elspeth finished on a big question about knowing the difference between kind of lobby-based material and well-founded research.
Yes, a very good question. Thank you, Tracy. First of all, to say, so I'm from Spice, the Scottish Parliament Information Centre. So most parliaments have units like ours, whose job is to be impartial and support MSPs with their individual inquiries and to support the parliamentary committees. It's worth going back to a point that the presiding officer made right at the start, I think, that the role of the Parliament is to hold the government to account, to scrutinise actions and so on. But also that, and picking up some of the themes from earlier questions too, MSPs have got a massive range of backgrounds, so perhaps some would be more suited to analyse that sort of evidence, whether coming from industry or NGOs or anywhere else alike, than others. And part of our role is to help them to hear from the right people at the right time, something else the presiding officer said as well, and to try and make sure that there's a balance in that. There's challenges in there too, because some of the issues that come to the Scottish Parliament are debated there, you might find that, for example, 99% of scientists would say one thing, and there'd be a degree of more scientific certainty around that, and 1% would say something different. So the challenge for us as a service as to how we would assess that, how we would present that sort of analysis and information in front of MSPs to help them to make the choices, to make sure they heard from the right people. But I guess at the end of the day, it would be for the MSPs to make that judgment based on the evidence that's in front of them, and hopefully for them to feel reassured that they have heard from the right range of people. And that can be a challenge, especially in such a complex and multifaceted system as you're talking about there, Elspeth, and can bring in other questions around, you know, for example, support for farmers to do certain things on the land, the other public goods that we get from the land and that sort of thing. So these are multifaceted issues, which hopefully we are there to help support MSPs on, but there will be a judgment call, I guess, to be made in the end.
Thank you, Graham. That's really helpful. Can I've seen Patrick Harvey's here and deals with, you know, carbon is an area that you get very tendentious studies in, and you must have to sift your way through all kinds of different material. Patrick, are you listening in on this? Can you jump in? No.
Thanks very much. Yeah, Graham started by explaining that, speaking on behalf of SPICE, he has to be completely impartial. I don't, so I'm not going to try. I think this is a really, really powerful question. It's a really important question, but it goes way beyond politics. It's about how information gets into our media as well. It's about how people consume information. You know, if you look at some of the very clearly lobbying voices that are presented in the media as though they are just impartial think tanks, for example, this is constant. I don't think as a society we have enough safeguards around transparency for private sector interests, vested interests, that are seeking to promote their own position, whether it's on something like the neonicotinoids, the kind of chemicals that you're talking about in agriculture, whether it's about the earlier examples you gave of the tobacco industry, or obviously the climate emergency. You know, we have had the first warning signals on climate in the 1950s. The oil and gas industry knew that it was getting warning signals on that in the 1950s. It took 20 years for them to start to acknowledge that that was true. They'd been hiding it until then. And after that, they spent another 20 years pumping out climate denial conspiracy stuff. And some of the organizations that they've used to do that are now mainstream lobbying voices in the British economy, the European economy, the US economy, and so on. So, you know, there is a problem in politics, absolutely, around the accountability of those vested interests. But it goes so much further beyond politics. It's about our media. It's about how the public consume information as well.
While we're on this subject, I do want to bring in a question. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Patrick, but you won't need another question coming in around the carbon issue, really, which is Brian Matthews, which I think he's asked Lindsay Murphy to read for him. And can I just say, I want to flag something here that we should come back to if we can, because I see we've got Daniel Johnston, we've got Richard Leonard, both with us from Public Accounts. I do think at some point we need to ask the question, do you look at whether studies are well-founded, well-grounded when you see where government spends its money, and you ask those questions? So I think that would be something to come back to. But can I ask Lindsay, we've got a question for Brian Matthews. Would you let us know where from? I think Richard Lockheed is his MP.
That's right, yes, it's from Maury. So the question is, the SNP's position on nuclear power is well known, but would the party be prepared to re-evaluate its total opposition to nuclear power if a molten salt reactor were to be proposed, more specifically a liquid fluoride thorium reactor? What evidence are MSPs looking for to take this step?
Okay, Richard, this is your constituent. So do you want to take the first? Remembering we're talking about evidence as much as we're talking about position here. So.
Okay, thanks. Well, I mean, the government has no plans to revisit our position on nuclear power, and of course it's very topical given the UK government were calling on us to do just that today. And that's for a variety of reasons. And, you know, we are having a refresh of our energy policy this year, but it will not include a revisiting of our position on nuclear power stations, because we don't believe any of the current technologies are better than what we have available alternatively. And also there's ongoing waste concerns we don't think have been addressed, environmental concerns for nuclear power as well. If you look at waste at the moment, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority spends £3 billion a year and has done for many, many years. 70% of that money comes from the public purse, and we believe that money could go to better uses in the future in terms of alternative energy, especially given Scotland's abundance of renewables and alternatives, which could create more jobs and avoid some of the problems we've had with nuclear power. Even the new technologies we believe would not be meeting the criteria we'd want to see met. Safety is another issue. At the moment, France is dependent on nuclear power, but it's got many, many nuclear power stations at the moment are shut down because of safety concerns. So that's an ongoing issue as well. And finally, value for money, even with the new technologies that have been spoken about, value for money remains a major, major issue. Again, nuclear power is very, very expensive compared to the alternatives. And that's not just including the waste costs and the cleanup cost, everything else that goes with that. Hinkley Point C is going to be priced at £92.50 per megawatt hour compared to £39.65 per megawatt hour for offshore wind. So, you know, the value for money doesn't stack up either. And again, we've not seen any evidence that any new technology would be any better in terms of the price. So that's our position at the moment. And Scotland's a net exporter of electricity, so why would we not make the most of our renewable abundance?
Right, so there's a position that you've given there, but you've also told us a bit about the evidence threshold for you on that. And I think Jenny Minto's actually also on the line, so Jenny really.
Thanks, Tracy. And just following up from what Richard was saying, I come at this, I suppose, and reflecting on what Patrick was saying as well, that I think we all have a belief structure as well within ourselves as to what is right and what is wrong. And I'm quite clear on nuclear power because my husband filmed at Chernobyl 10 years after that disaster, and understanding the experience that he was documenting for the world has kind of made my mind up. I saw the impact that it had on families, on young children. So from my perspective, it's the safety side of it, which I find very concerning. And I think as well, it's the longer time, the closing of plants and how that's impacted, but also where the uranium comes from and the impact that has on other countries. So my feeling is, and I've been involved in renewable energy for a number of years from a community perspective, is that the renewable energy benefits the country as a wide, but also it also benefits communities too with community returns, which I think are really important as well.
Thank you. I'm actually going to move. I know that there's a lot of dispute and disagreement around energy and what the energy mix should be across party lines. I think it is quite useful to look at that question of what people's evidence thresholds are. I mean, that's one of the things that's really been laid bare by that question is, and that's perhaps a very useful question for constituents to ask their MSPs, is what is their evidence threshold for change in the energy mix? And so I think very helpful to focus the question.
Yeah. If I may, Martin, in one of his comments in the chat, talked about people's lived experience. And that's certainly the thing that's really made me stop and think with the evidence that we've been getting in all committees. So I'm a member of two committees. You referenced the fact that I was in RAIN, but I'm also in SEAC. And we got the most powerful statements from the Consul General of Ukraine to that committee. And that really certainly has made me look at the news, look at the evidence, and I think from a personal perspective as well. So it's not just, I mean, I'm an accountant to trade, so I should love numbers and love statistics. But actually, I think there is so much power as well on people's experiences and the history, you know, why people farm in a specific way, why people go in a special place to fish. I think there's lots of different things to look at there.
I'm actually going to, Jenny, I'm going to skip over, precisely because of what you've said, I'm going to skip over the next question. We're going to come back to it. So we're going to go straight to Morgan Lofty, because the question looks to me like it really fits. And that's Edinburgh Southern. So I think we've got Daniel Johnston with us as well.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
My question is regarding whether when policymakers receive scientific data and literature, do they feel that they truly understand the information they're provided with? And do they feel they're qualified to interpret the data they have?
Okay, so that's going to Daniel. This is your constituent. That's a big question.
Yeah, can I just say, I think it's an excellent question. And I'm very pleased it's one that's coming from Edinburgh Southern. It's very meta. I mean, and in a sense, at the risk of quoting Donald Rumsfeld, obviously you don't know what you don't know. But to give a fuller answer is, you know, I think the real issue is not so much understanding per se what we have in front of us, is actually having the time to actually assimilate and assess all the information that we have available to us. That's not always as easy as I might like. I think we've got good information sources, whether that's government information from SPICE, academic evidence. In every evidence session that you'll take in a committee, you'll have a broad range of information. But I wonder whether or not we have the time and the procedure to digest that properly. Sometimes I find that the best sessions we have in Parliament are not the formal ones, but the informal ones, where we actually can converse and interrogate and you know, off the record in a less formal environment, really get into the detail and also ask the silly questions. I think one of the issues with formal session is that you feel very constrained. You don't want to be the one asking the silly question. So I think we do have the information available. I think sometimes I wonder whether we've got the time to. The one other thing I have been saying for some time, though, I would also like more training available for MSPs. I said right when I was first elected, and I continue to say, I would like all MSPs to be doing a course in statistics. And I think that should be available through the Parliament. And it's something I've raised before with parliamentary officials. Maybe that'll happen one day.
Thank you. I have to go to Graham at SPICE again at this point for training. And I think also I'm going to ask Ed Humphreys to say something on this question too.
Yeah, just very quickly, hopefully I can reassure Mr. Johnston, we're just taking on a statistics specialist actually, and we've been speaking to Ed's office and others about how we can best bring in that sort of expertise, both to improve and make training and so on available to MSPs, but also it's worth making the point to parliamentary officials and to staff of MSPs as well, because there's a support network there, I guess, to MSPs and to parliamentary committees. And we want to try and make sure everyone is as skilled in these things as we can be. And we find these challenges even in SPICE, where we've got subject specialists, we've got people who are more used to handling these topics as well. Some of those dynamics around the time that you have to pursue an issue, you know, in the same way that members are expected to turn things around at short notice, then we find those challenges too. And also one of the other issues for us is how we can have read across on those sorts of issues from one policy area to another. So trying to help members understand where there might be unintended consequences of taking one policy action or a budget decision in one place, and ensuring it doesn't have unintended consequences there. And the final thing I'll say is that in SPICE, we've developed what we're calling a Sustainable Development Impact Assessment tool. And it's a very long title, but the idea is that it can help MSPs, it can help committees, parliamentary officials look at a topic from a social, economic and environmental perspective to try and help us think through these things a bit more holistically from different angles, to try and ensure that the scrutiny that's being carried out is taking on board all these different angles. And those sorts of questions can be asked of the people that the Parliament's hearing from.
Okay, thank you. Ed, do you mind if I renege on that? And we've got two questions coming in about critical appraisal and other sorts of areas. And I want to come back to you. And is that okay? I'll come back to you as we get to those. I wanted to make sure that we've got Vicky Stone's question before we lose anybody with the ability to answer. I think Brian Whittle might be the right person here. Lindsay, are you asking Vicky Stone's question?
I am, yes. And so Vicky Stone from the Lothian region, her question was, in Europe, there is a huge focus on incorporating considerations of safety and sustainability into new products. What evidence will Scotland use to promote safety and sustainability to developers and industry?
Okay, I'm going to give a very brief response to that, please, to Brian Whittle and to Jenny Minto, I think also.
Okay, thank you. I think when we look at the products that we consume and the products that we purchase, I think what we need to be able to do is track those products back to where they were developed and built, or where they were produced, and as part of a sustainable global sustainable unit. We actually have to start considering that. We have to start considering that kind of supply chain, and some of that is actually taking place. So it's not just about the product that arrives on our doorstep. It's the journey that it's had from producing it and how far it's had to travel. So when we're looking at sustainability, we have to look at a whole system approach to this, not just in the products that we consume.
Yeah. Okay. And Jenny, did you want to add something to that?
Just very briefly, I think we've got to remember what sustainability actually means. And if I'll just quote from it, sustainability is defined by the UN as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think from my perspective, the constituency that I live on the island of Islay, and it's one of the things that's keeping that island sustainable is its whisky industry. But the whisky industry is pretty carbon intensive. So it's looking at how that industry can make itself more sustainable. So whether it's putting photovoltaic plates on the roofs, or not using cardboard packaging around their bottles, they are looking at different ways to move it on, because we need to keep that industry for a number of reasons. Economically, it's important for Scotland, but from a carbon perspective, it's got a very big footprint. And it's how do you change getting all the whisky off the island? Is there better ways of doing that? And I know that the distilleries are looking at that. So that's just one industry that's got quite a journey to take, but it's certainly looking at it from the present, but also the future as well. And I think that's the key thing around sustainability.
Thank you. We got a bunch of new questions coming in around what MSPs actually look at, how well trained you are, and so on. So I'm going to go on to those in a moment. I just wanted to flag, I don't know if Paul O'Kane's still with us, but we have a question that's a bit of a specific one. Given that vaccines are not meant to be administered intravenously, what was the evidence behind the policy of not aspirating the needle when giving an injection? So that's from David Lemon in Dunfermline. I think that's rather a specific question, but maybe if Paul is with us as a member of the Health Committee, could indicate what would you do with questions like that? How do you investigate? Is Paul still with us? No, we've dropped him off. Okay, I think what we'll try and do with that is we'll just try and pick that up with Shelley and some of them.
I'm on Health Committee, Tracy.
So of course you are. Thank you.
I think that's a very specific question. I don't think anyone that sits on the Health Committee would be qualified for that. So if we were concerned around that, we would be getting the witnesses in to ask questions around that and looking for them to deliver some evidence to us and work together to really untangle it and interpret it. That'd be the best way forward. Yeah,
I think that's the answer for that question. Thank you. Then can we move on to Lindsay? You have a question from John McLennan.
Yes, I do. John McLennan from Midlothian, South Tweeddale and Lauderdale. And his question is, what training have you and your colleagues had in critical appraisal of scientific papers? If politicians are going to seek expert scientific evidence and make decisions for political, not scientific reasons, should this not be made explicit? How can the public be more involved in decision-making that balances evidence and politics?
Right. Okay. Before we take responses to that, I'm going to also take Nick Church, because I think your question is in the same ballpark. Nick, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you. So I wanted to ask, can you explain for people here what a p-value is and how you as a policymaker would interpret a p-value of less than 0.05 when judging scientific support for a particular policy? More widely, do you feel that policymakers have the resources available to equip themselves to understand statistics such as the p-value properly, and how to interpret them in the context of evidence-driven policymaking?
Right. Okay.
I'd really rather like an answer to the first question that's quite precise.
It is a very precise question. I'm sure Mary Gudgeon's quite glad not to be here right now from your constituency. I think that's one of those things where you kind of want to test people's knowledge, and it's as to what a p-value is. If MSPs would like to proffer a response to this, you may. It is, of course, controversial, and people use the term in a very disputed fashion. I think what really sits behind it is perhaps the hypothesis that if MSPs knew what a p-value was, they would make better decisions. That's presumably what's meant by that. So, Michael Murray, you've been really brave on sticking your hand straight up for this one, so I'm going to go to you.
Okay, I think Richard had his up first, but I will. But I'll go. He might actually know the real answer. So I actually, in a previous existence, so I was the deputy director of the Leverhulme Research Centre for Forensic Science, and we worked with the senior judiciary across the UK to prepare documentation on the use of statistics in courts in order to evaluate the statistical probability of a piece of evidence being admissible and usable in a courtroom, and that p-values featured heavily in that work, trying to understand whether the result of an experiment was statistically significant. So the presence of DNA in a crime scene and whether that might be a significant thing or not. Certainly there was the p-value in terms of whether testing it against the null hypothesis was part of that description. That said, Nick, very little of that comes into my day-to-day work as an MSP, I have to say, evaluating individual scientific papers and experiments or pieces of research. What MSPs and politicians typically do is look at these things in aggregate. We will take on different sources, and we will take trusted expert advice. And I understand that I think that touches a little bit on some of the points that made earlier in terms of how we decide what expertise is and isn't, and who we can trust and who we can't. And so what we are people who have to judge how we can balance up those different areas and the different countervailing points of view that come to us, whether those be scientific or otherwise, in that process. So so I think I would say that the training that we have for that as politicians is non-existent. Dan's already made that point. It's some better training on statistics would be good. But many of us, I think, bring different professional backgrounds to the job. My understanding of p-values and the null hypothesis may be entirely wrong, and I would be happy to be corrected.
That's an absolutely knockout response. Statisticians everywhere are just swooning at the amount of expertise there is in Holyrood. That's absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of people want to speak on this issue because it sort of touches, the extent to which MSPs should be prepared in terms of training, or is it about the expertise you have available to you, and is that enough? Richard Leonard's had a hand up on this. I'm going to go to Richard, and then I think there were a couple of other hands, but I do also want to ask Ed Humphreys on this question too.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I'll be brief. Obviously, I agree with everything Michael just said. I taught him all that he knows. But there is another issue here which we haven't touched on yet, and I know the time is running out, that we do need to address, and that is where there is a dearth of data. And one of the regular issues that the Public Audit Committee finds itself raising is that lack of data. So just last week, we were hearing evidence from Audit Scotland that there is no collection of data from GPs about appointments, for example. And actually, it would serve the cause of GPs in their case that they are under pressure and so on, if that information was available. But there is a reluctance on their part to give it. There was a report out by Audit Scotland last week which talked about the award of business grants. And I'll finish just by reading a sentence from that report. The Auditor General for Scotland said, due to businesses being potentially eligible for support under more than one funding stream, it is not currently possible to determine the exact number of businesses that received support. And there are whole areas where there has been no sufficient recording of where that money has gone. So the Auditor General tells us that knowing where the money went matters. There's a shortage of data, there's an absence of data, there's a shortage of data, and we just need to be better at it. And the government in particular needs to be much more transparent about it.
Thank you. Fantastic. And Nick, sorry, not Nick. I wasn't going to come back to Nick. Sorry, Nick, that was your question. Sorry. We're going on to Ed now, actually.
Well, thank you. I think this point about access to expertise is really, really important, that both MSPs and ministers in government have access to scientific expertise, analytical expertise, people like Roger Halliday, who we've heard from, and Audrey, who we've heard from. But I think there's another side to that coin, which is we shouldn't necessarily expect people who are elected representatives to be themselves the experts. We should expect them to be intelligent customers. But on the other hand, when they are making their decisions, to be very clear that the evidence base is available to all, that it's completely publicly transparent and open, so that we can all see what evidence there is, how it's been drawn on, how it's been weighted. I think that public transparency is so vital to kind of public trust and confidence, that it's not just in a closed room that evidence is used and looked at. And I have to say one other thing, Tracy, you were observing earlier about how impressive the answers were. Just as a signal for that, the Royal Statistical Society asked MPs in Westminster a statistical question as a test, and asked them, if you tossed a coin twice, what's the probability of getting heads twice in a row? And only 52% of MPs got it right. And by my reckoning, you MSPs have just been asked a much more complicated question, and Michael Mara at least got it pretty bang on. So that's just a sign of difference between Westminster and Holyrood there for you, right?
That's there. Fantastic. Thank you. And I know that Graham at Spice and others and Allison will have views on this too, for sure. Nick's giving you a round of applause, so he's satisfied. That's wonderful. I do want to fit in a few more questions. Liam Butler, you're a student and from Paisley, and you have a question.
Yeah, hello. So my question is on the life science sector in Scotland, which is an important contributor to Scotland's economy, providing 40,000 jobs across 750 diverse organisations. Now, the Scottish life science sector has the potential to be a world leader. So how well equipped is the government, and what evidence are they using to ensure that the Scottish life science sector continues to grow and develop in both an innovative and collaborative way?
Thank you. That is a challenging question. I'm going to go to Brian Whittle, MSP, on this, but I do want to ask Roger Halliday, because I know that's something that you've been thinking about.
Thank you for your question, Liam. I mean, I'm almost quite glad you didn't come to me to discuss integral calculus and p-values. It's a very long time since I've been involved in that kind of nonsense. But I think it's a very good point, Liam. Not only could it be world leading, I think Scotland is world leading in this particular field in the life sciences. I do think that in terms of the government set up to do this, I'm not convinced right now that we are. I think that's a role of opposition to scrutinise that, and the role of Parliament to scrutinise that. I think when we look at our education system, I don't think it's particularly currently set up well enough to look at the jobs of the future and to support industry as it currently is. So in that respect, I think we have got a world-leading life science sector in Scotland, and we need to make sure that going forward, that we're putting pressure on the government, we're scrutinising the government to ensure that the education system is there to support that, and also to make sure that the support system, the support network is there for business in general, but in life sciences in particular, because that is a world leading area within Scotland.
Thank you, Brian. Don't go away. We've got at some point we're going to come to an environmental question that's coming through, a conservation question. Also, people I would love to stick with us is Eleanor Whittam and Paul O'Kane for a question that's coming in at the moment about social science research use. So I'd love to come to you shortly. So please stick with us. Are there any other comments on this particular? Daniel, you wanted to speak on this?
Yeah, and thank you for letting me come in. Obviously, representing Edinburgh Southern, I have the King's Buildings from Edinburgh University in my constituency. The bio quarter is just outside. And so the health of life sciences is a key focus for me, as Edinburgh University plays host to probably Scotland's most important cluster. And there is a challenge here. I mean, I've had a conversation recently with the principal of Edinburgh University, and I think there was a real concern about whether we're managing to keep life science organisations and businesses in Edinburgh. I think that there is a tendency for startups, both in life sciences but in other spaces, to start up in Scotland, but then move either to Cambridge or London or elsewhere in the world. And I think there's a number of reasons. I think partly there's a funding issue, but I think it also comes down to prosaic things like planning regime. And I think fundamentally what we need to do is have an ability to coordinate across these policy areas so that we can actually ensure that we don't just start up these companies and these organisations, but we also retain them, because that's what we're struggling to do in Scotland.
Okay, there's a university top trumps going on in the chat at the moment, where Michael Mara points out that Dundee University came highest in life sciences. I'll leave you to fight that one out between you. Roger Halliday, did you have something on this briefly to say?
Not too much to add, only that where we'll be quite powerful internationally is where we create conditions where universities can come together rather than compete, and could come together as well with industry and the NHS to really create value. And at the fundamental root of it, it's all about unlocking the data that we've got, which is life sciences, the blood of life sciences, to use a bad analogy. And that's what the government's really investing in through Research Data Scotland and other players.
Right, thank you. Lindsay, I'm going to ask you to, we're running short of time, and I know that there are two questions sitting on your desk, and then I think, is Nicole with us to ask a question? I just want to check that Nicole is with us. Yeah, okay, Nicole. Yeah. We'll come to you after that. So Lindsay, there's sort of relationships between the two of the questions that are flagging up to me here, from Marta and from Heather. Could you tell us the constituencies, please? And and we'll see how we go with, I think Eleanor would be the person I'll go to for some of these, and perhaps also Audrey Mcdougall.
Okay, no worries. It's Heather Doran from Angus South asks, the Scottish Government states that the main aims of early learning and childcare expansion are to improve children's outcomes and help close the poverty-related attainment gap, increase family resilience through improved health and well-being of children and parents, and support parents into work, study or training. Please can I ask what measures of success are being used for these aims, and how and what data is being collected as evidence of this? Will the Scottish Government commit to publishing this data in a timely way? And then the next question is from Marta Isabor from Lothian. And her question is, Scottish Government follows scientific advice in a number of areas like renewable energy, but are policymakers looking at evidence from the social sciences as well when shaping policy decisions?
Right. Eleanor Whittam, I'm going to give you the choice of those two questions.
Okay, I will go with the second one, seeing as I have a degree in social science, not so much of an egghead that way, but I also have a degree in journalism and communications. My husband, on the other hand, and my father are all scientists, and my brother is a professor of geology. So we have great many arguments round about the Christmas table, round about soft sciences, as they call it, and hard science, right? So my degree and their opinion isn't worth as much as theirs. I think they're jesting with me. But the reality of it is, unless we actually look at social sciences and the evidence that we see in the data from that side of it, we're not going to make well-rounded decisions. It can't all just be based solely on p-values and all of the other science that we've been talking about tonight. So social science absolutely has its place and the decision making that we need to do. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. I think Audrey Mcdougall and Audrey Mcdougall both here. They both back you up. So Audrey Mcdougall, I'm going to take on this specific question, and then Audrey Mcdougall, would you like to speak on this?
So thank you, Tracy. I'll come in here. Absolutely, I completely agree with the comment that has just been made. I mean, it was particularly important when we looked across COVID that all of the work that we did looked across what we call the 4 harms. So we looked at the direct harms of COVID, the health harms of COVID, the social science, the social harms of COVID, and the economic harms. And that was a real example of where all the different elements of government advice came together to bring their particular perspectives. And indeed, we have a Scottish Government, what's called a Chiefs Group, which is made up of the Chief Advisors, including the Chief Medical Officer, Chief Scientific Advisor, Chief Social Policy Advisor, Chief Economist, Chief Researcher, Chief Statistician, and we all come together to discuss these issues where we think you do need to look at them from all angles. And I would say for any major policy development, that is what you need to do.
Thank you. Audrey Mcdougall, did you want a brief comment? We want to leave 5 minutes for Nicole to ask her question too.
Yeah, thanks. I've kind of forgotten what the first question was, but in terms of the second question, I would probably concur with Elena and Audrey and just say from my perspective in terms of criminal justice, which is my area of interest, if you like, issues arising from study of social science subjects and issues around things like social harm, social norms, they all feed in either directly or indirectly into some of the discussions that we have within the criminal justice context. So whether that is looking at issues around vulnerability, around addiction, problem drug use, tackling drugs deaths, reducing the prison population, it all interlinks, and there is such an intersect, it would just take me too long to cover that off, but very, very relevant.
Yeah, and I thought your committee's work probably illustrates that one of the best. I don't have time to go on the first part. The first question was about measures of success, increasing family resilience, improving health and well-being of children and parents. I don't have time at this point now to go to Michael Mara on this. Michael, can I ask that we would get a noted answer from you to send to the constituent? Is that okay? Can I ask my colleagues to take that up with you? Thank you. As young people in education. Nicole, your turn.
Right, hi there. Environmental issues like climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution have been recognized by the UN Environment Programme as major global crises. These are long-term ongoing concerns and their effects are impacting us here and now. Unfortunately, these issues are easily overshadowed by events like pandemics, wars, food shortage concerns and rising energy prices. So my question is, how can we ensure that Scottish policymakers don't lose sight of these environmental issues? Are policymakers equipped to understand the importance of these issues in the face of other emergencies? Strong scientific evidence points towards the long-term harm if we do not act now.
Brian Whittle, Martin after that.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And really excellent, pertinent question right now. I think the reality is this, and it's my, I said this earlier on, that I think that I'm glad everybody was sitting down when I said it in a conference earlier on. In my experience, every MSP and MP that I've ever met has a similar outcomes that they're aiming for and passions that they're aiming for our communities. We just have different routes of getting there. I think that the climate emergency, without question, has jumped to the forefront of our thoughts all the time. And in fact, I think what's happening, the atrocities that are happening in places like Ukraine and the pandemic have, in my view, have only accelerated our concerns towards climate change and environmental issues. And we're going to have what we do in Parliament, as I think we've discussed these a lot in Parliament, but what we, especially the opposition, do in Parliament is we drive the government. as hard as we can, and we scrutinise the government as hard as we can, to not just discuss, but not just make targets, but actually make the changes and make the route required to get to where we need to get to. At the moment, in my opinion, we have far too many targets and not enough actions. But the reality is we are the consideration of the environment and the consideration of climate change is very much at the forefront of our minds. As I said, the issues that have come up, the terrible issues in Ukraine, the terrible issues of the pandemic, in my view, are driving our policies quicker in this area, and I'm glad to see that. We need to go faster. We need to go further. And I think you have a variety of parties on the line here, and I think would probably agree with me on that particular point. We need to find out and we need to work out a route map to get us where we need to get to, because right now we don't have that.
Thank you. I'm going to take Martin. Did you want to comment briefly?
Not really, apologies. I was trying to answer the childcare question in the chat.
I did realise that was very relevant for you as well, and I'm sorry not to have taken you on that. I think we would welcome all submissions that we can share, on that. And any other questions that have come in, if I see in the chat, there's a lot of supply. These MSPs really know their stuff. I mean, my goodness, they're putting so many reports in there. We should be sharing those with your constituents as well, and making sure that they're aware of particularly past committee reports and things like that I think seem to have fallen off the radar a bit on some of these issues. Thank you. Is there any other comment on this before I would just like to take Graham Cook to say, part of the work for you is also to kind of help MSPs to monitor issues and to sort of investigate new things that are emerging within their constituencies and within sort of global debates to see whether there's an issue there that they should be pursuing, isn't it? I mean, part of this is to kind of take a snapshot of an issue for them.
Yeah, that's true, and we're here to answer questions on a constituency basis as well. Just this week, we've published a blog outlining renewable energies, which can be drilled down to by constituency level, which might be the sort of thing that can help MSPs. On the sort of more macro level, the conveners group, so that's the conveners of all the parliamentary committees coming together, have agreed that climate change is one of those cross-committee issues that needs to be looked at further. Behind the scenes, we're trying to work out how we can best do that, how we can best make sure that the right evaluation and support can go into place to support MSPs and committees on that. And that includes accessing, we're working with the Royal Scottish Geographical Society on their climate solutions training as well. So that's the sort of thing we're trying to bring to bear to make available to MSPs and others in the Parliament to try and improve and facilitate the debate on these issues.
Thank you. That's a really positive note to end this on. I should finish by saying thank you very much. I just think that's an absolutely tremendous display of interest in such a diverse range of issues that MSPs are across. It's truly impressive, and I hope that constituents who have joined us here in the Zoom, but also who are watching out there on the other platforms, have a sneaking admiration for their MSPs that they do this. That was really amazing. I also think it's quite impressive that constituents show such an active interest, not just in MSPs representing the issues within their constituency, but within their taking interest in their role as scrutinisers of government policy and people who are looking at across the horizon at the issues that are going to come down the policy track in a big or a small way. So I think it's quite gratifying to see that constituents are so engaged with that. There are many, many questions that we haven't raised tonight, but will be raised over the next few days. If, as an MSP, you haven't signed up yet for some of those briefings and some of those kind of relationship building opportunities with cutting edge researchers across Scotland, please do so. And your constituents are also looking at what you're attending and also coming along where they can as well. So we'll try and marry up more of you over the week around the issues that you care about. There's a superb event tomorrow looking at use of data, and so we look forward to seeing many of you there. But thank you for giving us your Monday evenings and for such superb answers. Thank you to all the partners and the experts that have joined us. It's a really, really brilliant opening, and I think it says to me that there'll be many more to come But thanks and good night.